Major developments taking place right now in China. You need to know everything, and I will cover that for you today. The first thing I want to touch on is the lockdowns. I'm going to show you actual footage from what's occurring in and outside of Beijing. The second thing is the economic problems. When you tie all of this together, it starts to make a lot of sense, and I'm going to bring that all to you right now. Let's begin. In addition to what I covered in yesterday's video, of course, if you haven't seen that already, you definitely want to check it out after this one. I'm going to tell you about the fact that there are lockdowns that are occurring, and it's including some of the manufacturing areas that supply the West. So you see how these two connect initially, okay? China reported record number of infections. They got the lockdowns happening. They got mass testing, and it's fueling unrest and darkening the country's economic outlook. This is important because you can see how it affects not just China or not just one area, but each area is going to have different rules and regulations and things that they put in place. And of course, that has an impact on people there. But that has a ripple effect based on who they're exporting to. Each area of China is kind of split up. So if they're manufacturing plastic products, they're in one area. If they're manufacturing metal products, they're going to be in another area. So you're going to see it affecting companies in a different way. And then that leads into just the unrest that they're seeing right now. And I wanted to give you a look at some of what's been happening. Now, we can see geopolitically, if you kind of take a 30,000 foot view or zoom out, as I like to call it, we can see that China is definitely at the forefront of trying to achieve a level of hegemony, or at least taking away from what the US has. And right now, this is just part of it. You could see that the pledge for support of Cuba in their core interests. So of course that goes in line with what they're seeing with Russia and the BRICS nations. Now economically, obviously Cuba is not a powerhouse, but it is geographically positioned in an interesting location. Obviously with the US, we see how the Cold War, this is something that the US is always concerned about, and that's why they want to keep these tensions on. It's great for the military-industrial complex. Is Washington still our ally? EU accuses US of profiteering from the Ukraine war through sales of guns and gas and threatening their trade war. This is important, of course, because we can see that while Europe is fighting with the United States, you look at these countries like China are basically going out there and they're saying, hey, let's do business. Let's have an economic tie between us. And while we can argue about, China's ties to Africa and what that has done, I think it's important just to look at it and see that things are changing from a grand scale. Okay, that's all I'm trying to mention. Okay, then we look here. This is an anti-lockdown protests in the suburbs of Beijing. And this is part of this. So you could look at these people here and it's just showing us exactly where they are. So it's, because some people say, no, that wasn't the case. They're not really there. They are not actually here at this time. And, they're making all the excuses. So I'm not sure if you could hear what's going on here. The volume should be down. But essentially what we're looking at are people walking around. They're not too happy. Okay, so I had a few that I wanted to show you. If you look through this one as well, and you could see this is in the western part of China. A lot of people, and they're basically saying, stop the lockdowns. We are human beings. In fact, they were also waving the Chinese flag, symbolizing they're not anti-government. They are not against the government and generally what's happening there, but they are against the lockdown policies. So that's what they're trying to get at. This is a particular building that was locked down completely, and there was a fire inside and they could not get inside there, and unfortunately some people lost their lives. We have these protests here, just more of the same. You're looking at people that don't want to be dealing with this. I think, that's the way it is. And by the way, I'm not presenting you with my opinion on the situation. My opinion doesn't matter. I'm just trying to show you these things because they have an economic impact on the global scale. And as an investor, you can also look at this. It's important. That's what I'm trying to show you. Economic aspect And what does that mean to you, the individual? You might not be locked down. You might not be in this country, but it still is important on so many different levels, okay? And so while you're going to see these videos, you'll see the protests, you'll see all these different things happening. I think you get the point. I'm not going to just, go on and on with this, but you get the point. You see what I'm saying here. There's a lot of people that are not happy about the situation, and so they're fighting back in what ways they can, and that's it, okay? That's the one aspect, but it's the economy itself that I want to touch on. Foxconn woes could hit at least 30% of iPhone November shipments from China plant. You see, lockdown one area. This particular area, I covered this in the previous video if you haven't seen it already. They lock down this one area. That means nothing is going to get moving from the plant where they're being produced onto the ships. Okay, there's probably not going to be any trucks picking up the stuff to bring it on the ships, sea shipping across, and that would go off to, let's say, LA Long Beach. Okay, that's not happening. So this has an impact on Apple. So you as an investor, if you're looking at that, you have to understand that while we do have some level of diversification of the supply chain that has taken place, still minute. The more diversification that Apple does, the better it is as an investor of Apple. However, you compare the two, I mean, it's not even close. China is just way further ahead than Vietnam and India, who are, China, or I should say, when you look at Apple and what they've done, they're trying to go to these other countries, but certainly way behind China. Now, I wanted to show you Apple's US exposure to related companies. And just looking at Apple and who their suppliers are, that's on the left side. So you can see Qualcomm and Broadcom and Pegatron and all these different companies. There are 700 suppliers in total. On the right-hand side, they have the customers. And that are, the Vodafones and the T-Mobiles, Verizons, and so on. And it's important that you see this and see the connections, because if suddenly Qualcomm doesn't want to do business with Apple, they have to seek another supplier. But then what happens to those chips? Well, they need to, suddenly struggle to get them. They can't produce their iPhones or their computers and this and that. And of course, that has an impact on their sales. So this is the reason I bring this type of stuff up, and I hope you do appreciate that. This is all part of when we look at it on a different scale. You got to take the news and you got to break that down and understand, okay, what does this mean for me? What is this for me? How am I affected by this? And that's what I'm trying to bring to you here. And then we'll get into the next aspect right now, the economic aspect, because that, my friends, is where things get really interesting. We forecast global recession in 2023. Now, this is the chief economist at the IIF, and these forecasts are never accurate. However, just about everybody is saying, okay, recession's on, it's gonna happen, and the base case is mild recession. That's kind of the consensus. I've read Bank of America, Morgan Stanley, all these different reports, and they've basically said the same thing. Yield curve steepening is the best indicator that a recession has begun. And what I wanted to show you here is that when this occurs, what is the yield curve, by the way? For those who don't know, essentially when you have think about it like this. You're going to get a 30-year bond, or you're going to get, a 3-month bond. You would think the 30-year bond carries more risk. It's a very long time frame, and you would get more of a return as a result. But what if it was the opposite? What if the 3-month bond is getting you a higher return than the 30-year? That's what this is all about, okay? It's a yield curve inversion. However, when it flips the other direction, that is really when things start to get bad. It's kind of counterintuitive in that way, but it's when that goes in the other direction. As you can see, the gray shaded areas are recessions, and it always dips down, and then you see that red line on the way back up. That's when the recession occurs. The Treasury market's big recession trade is gathering momentum. Investors see rates lower over longer term, even as the Fed hikes. Slew of key data coming up on jobs, manufacturing, and inflation. That is this week, so we'll keep an eye on that. Make sure you hit subscribe, and I will bring you the details you need to know. But you're looking at literally just a couple weeks away from the Federal Reserve making their big decision of 50 basis point hike. That's what the market is expecting. If it gets 75 basis points, it's going to go make a stain in its underpants. And I think that for a lot of people, this is going to be something to watch. And that will be on the 14th. So make sure you subscribe to the channel. I'll bring that directly to you, okay? Global oil market flashes warnings as demand concerns spike. So this is when we start to get to these aspects where you look at oil. Just recently, it seemed like a couple days ago, WTI crude was at $83 a barrel, and that is now I think something like $76 or $78 a barrel. So things are changing. And why? Because there's enough supply, supposedly, all of a sudden there's enough supply, and yet we have lack of demand, and this is what they're telling us anyway. We don't really know in time, but I think it's important to watch what happens with oil, probably the most important commodity right now today, to give us an indication of what's happening with the global economy. Loans and hardship withdrawals from 401ks are rising. New study finds more Americans tapping their retirement accounts early with the economy on shaky ground. They have to do this because their credit card usage is through the roof. They're pulling out money from their homes, home equity line of credits. They're doing what they can in order to really try to stop the bleeding from occurring. And this is a sign, this is a telltale sign that people are in dire straits today. That's very important, okay? Global growth to be as weak as next year, to be as weak next year as in 2009. This is from the IIF, but just trying to show you that we're seeing this all over the place. What are people doing? Some people are moving. Some people are literally just getting out. Kuala Lumpur, as in Malaysia, is the top global city for expats. Why? Because of the cheaper housing costs and low taxes. This is a place that a lot of people have been talking about. You could look at the list, best cities for expats, Kuala Lumpur on the top. We have Tbilisi in Georgia, and then we have Lisbon and Dubai. Now, Dubai, much more expensive, but for those who are earning a nice wage, then with no taxes whatsoever, they can accumulate quite a bit. And, there are areas, depends on where you live, that are reasonably priced. So this is what people are doing. They're basically moving out. They're voting with their feet, and they're saying, I can't do this. I can't keep up. And essentially, same thing with the oil. Oil market metrics signal sufficient supply and weakening demand. I think that's important just to highlight the fact that the global economy is slowing down. It has been this way for a while, and it's expected, because when we look at the obvious fact that when you increase your interest rates, you're going to have a slowdown that's going on, and that's what we're experiencing today. So you see what we look at with China. They're locking down. This has the direct impact on the companies and what they are doing. Now, I want to break this down for you right here. Let's take a look at this next aspect. So what's happening in China right now? Well, let's talk about it. Reduce your exposure as an individual because of all this. Reduce your exposure to any single source. That's important because just like Apple relies so heavily on China, they relied on that one source, it burned them. So you as an individual, watch out. This goes for your business, and this goes for your investments as well. Invest broadly to reduce your risk. So you don't want to just say, I'm going to invest in US tech stocks and that's it. Because you could see what happened with tech. They took the biggest beating out of all. Eliminate high interest debt at all possible. Do whatever you can to get rid of it. Even if you got to take out the home equity line of credit to pay down the high interest rate stuff, that might be a wise decision. Speak to a professional about that. There's a lot of companies out there who can actually help get rid of some of your debt. Cut your losers and keep your winners. Now is the time to simply say, look, that just didn't work out. I tried it, didn't work. Let me move that on and get to something much better. Be mindful of where you get your advice. Never put all your eggs in one basket. It might seem fine today, but tomorrow is a different story. And just look at FTX and BlockFi. So many people were trusting these companies. Even those who are promoting it, I get it, they were promoting it, but they should have told all their subscribers separately, not in the advertisement, but said, you know, you shouldn't be keeping your money on these platforms. It's okay to buy using them, but then put them away somewhere safe and sound. That's really important. I think that, you know, it shouldn't need to be said, but hey, that's where we are today. I want to thank you for being here. Do you want more info like this? If so, hit that subscribe button and I'll see you tomorrow.